despite what some people and commentators might wish to see, there's not really a silver bullet that is going to deal with the economic malaise that we find ourselves in. I think what needs to happen, and this was precisely the reason for our putting together the Economic Policy Framework, what needs to happen is, concerted action on a very broad front of issues that are going to attack what, in our view, are some of the underlying issues that have contributed to less than stellar growth over the last, not 10 years, but since independence. The truth is that Jamaica, since independence, has managed to achieve a cumulative per capita growth in income of around 30%. That compares with Barbados at 94%, compares with Trinidad at about 110%, and all of our major trading partners in the developed world at in excess of 100%. So I think that, both in the short and the longer term, we have to address the underlying root causes of that economic malaise if we're to come out of the slump that we're in. Now, I do think that within the menu of options that the government has, clearly they need to be focusing in particular on those emerging industries that have the potential to provide significant employment opportunities for Jamaicans. And I think a prime example of that is the ICT industry. There is under development a tech park in Montego Bay on the Barnett Estates. Vistaprint, which is an overseas operation, is the first tenant in that park, and construction is about to start on those facilities. But anything that the government can do to facilitate the rapid scaling up of our entry into that market in a meaningful way, I think is one of the things that, in the short term can make a difference. Because at the end of the day, what we need to address is the fact that in recent times we've lost about 90,000 jobs. That has flow-through effects, loss of income, and therefore constrained consumption, which is in effect having an impact on businesses that depend on consumer demand. I think that as we see recovery in the global economic environment, and we have to keep our eyes also very, very carefully focused on the US as our major tourism market. If we can get to sustain arrivals and can get our rates back up to pre-2009 levels, that's going to make a big difference. If we can get the bauxite plants back online, I know that one opened recently, but there is some prospect, I believe, of some of the other plants reopening, that is going to replace or resuscitate some of those jobs that have been lost. Jobs, I think, needs to be the critical objective in the short term. Investment takes place in a stable macroeconomic environment, and that's the first prerequisite, we believe, for economic growth. Now, when we talk about macroeconomic stability, we're talking about sustainable debt, sustainable fiscal accounts. We're talking about stability in the foreign exchange market. We're talking about containing inflation at levels that are consistent with our own trading partners, so that we do not need to adjust through the mechanism of the exchange rate over time for any loss of competitiveness that we have. I think a great deal has been done in that area to achieve macroeconomic stability with the IMF program, with the fiscal consolidation program that the government is undergoing. But there are other issues also that can contribute to enabling investment and growth. One of the critical areas that we see as an opportunity is to do something that we don't seem to have been able to have done in the past, and that is to mobilize the very significant entrepreneurial talents of the Jamaican population. And in order to do so, we have to provide a legal and regulatory environment in which it is easy to start a business, whether it is easy to pay taxes and remain compliant within the tax system, where very significantly the barriers that currently present themselves to a wide cross-section of the population in terms of access to credit are dealt with. We need to take a look at the collateral framework and how we're going to make it easier for people to pledge collateral and make it easier for lenders to realize on that collateral when there's an issue. Steps are being taken in that area, the credit bureau and so on. Also, I think the fact that only about 20% of Jamaica's land space is actually titled. There are a vast number of Jamaicans who essentially own land that do not necessarily have a regularized title to that land. And that land in aggregate represents a huge store of wealth that in effect those individuals do not have access to in order to promote their own economic well-being. So land titling reform and the issuing of titles, we think, is a critical feature of that element of creating an enabling business environment. The third and final pillar of the framework relates to recommendations that we have made for reform of industrial trade and investment promotion policies. And again, there are a range of recommendations that are made in that area. And a number of them will depend upon public sector intervention, but a number of them also require the input and the very strong commitment of the private sector. I think one of the issues that we're struggling with right now in Jamaica is that we have a pretty depressed global economy. We, because of the structural imbalances that have existed in our economy, have felt the effects of that global malaise more so perhaps than some other economies. And there is a tendency psychologically in that kind of an environment to be risk averse. And I think that the private sector in that sense needs to step up to the plate, needs to make the investments that are going to make the difference and are going to pay dividends based upon the sacrifices that we have also made in issues like the JDX and the various tax packages that we have had to implement. I think that the public sector restructuring is very important. It needs to be grounded, however, in a philosophical framework, I think. The size of government and the size of the wage bill is an obvious issue. But I think the overweening consideration needs to be the efficient delivery of public services. And, it is not for very long that we can simply go along the path of wage restraint. The fact is that in order to attract and retain the kind of skills that the public sector needs, because bear in mind, at the end of the day, a large part of the public sector role is the management of the delivery of these public services. And if we're not prepared to pay competitive wages in the public sector, we are unlikely to be able to continue to attract and retain the kind of personnel that we need. There are a lot of very, very able, very, very committed people in the public sector who remain within the public sector, not because that is the most financially attractive option for them, but because of the commitment that they have to the public service. And we need to change that. So I think it's going to have to be a combination not only of consolidation over time, but also improvements in the terms and conditions of employment. One of the very, very big concerns for us in the private sector is the whole issue of public sector pensions. Right now, there is no funded public sector pension plan. And in fact, current retirement benefits are being paid out of the budget, straight from the budget. And I think in 2009 amounted to somewhere on the order of $14 billion. And that has been escalating quite rapidly over the last few years. But even more than the recurrent cost of the pensions now, what is of great concern to us is the past service liability that is being built up in respect of public sector employees who are going to retire in the future. Now, the way that that has been dealt with in the private sector, where companies operate pension plans, is that both the company and the employee contribute over the course of the employee's working life to a pension plan, which then provides a pension at the end of that individual's working life. And if we look at the current cost of pensions in payment and make some very crude assumptions about the size of the workforce, the average years of service, and therefore years to retirement, the average age, and so on, it is likely that that unfunded liability is a very, very significant number. And that's not to say it's a responsibility that we think that the government ought to try and wriggle its way out of. But like everything else in life, we need to face our problems and deal with them in very decisive ways. And we don't necessarily feel that successive governments have really sought to address the problem. It's an unfunded liability, it's off balance sheet, so it's not something that we really need to worry about. And we think it is something that we need to worry about. And we need to establish a proper funded scheme within the public sector where the government contributes annually and the public sector employees also contribute annually to the ultimate goal of providing a reasonable pension upon retirement for our public servants.